Let's go. Here is my story. In today's story, Opus found out his wife cheated on him after he found pics of her and her AP in his mailbox. Now let's get into today's story to find out what Opus did to get revenge. I know this happened over 20 years ago, but I can't help but want to share this. I was married to my wife Lily in my mid-30s. She was 33 then, and we were a basic family who had the bare minimum, no kids, which I was grateful for. She wanted a new kitchen, and that meant one thing: longer hours at work for me and barely enough time to be home when she got back from school. I thought getting her what she wanted was going to make her happier, but it didn't. Instead, she would barely look at me while I tried conversing with her, and she answered with curt nods when I asked questions. It went on like this for weeks. I was coming back tired to my distant wife. One day at work, I began to sweat profusely, even when it was less than 20 degrees Celsius outside. My coworker, who happened to see me rub my eyes to clear my blurry vision, insisted I go home. I had painkillers to help me get my head together before climbing into my truck and driving home. This was the first time in months that I was going home early. It was going to surprise Lily. I parked my truck out front when I realized she wasn't back yet. By the time I was heading for the door, I noticed there was mail in the box. I was never one to check the mail because my wife got home before I did, but this mail caught my attention. I grabbed it and checked who it was for. It was an address not too far away and within the city, with our return address, and the sender was Lightly. It was natural to ignore the mail, knowing she was always sending something like this, but then I found it weird that the recipient's address was still in this town, not too far from where I lived. My curiosity got the best of me, and I opened it up, especially because the envelope was pink and had faint cute hearts sprinkled on it. It wasn't anything you'd send a serious letter in. Alarm bells in my head were already going off, and the dizziness I felt earlier at work washed away. My finger pulled at the print inside, and my heart broke at what I saw. Nudes. They were nudes, her nudes. That wasn't all. There was a handwritten letter telling the recipient to enjoy. With my blood boiling and my head hot, I closed it up and studied the address again. Knowing the place was a few streets away, I climbed into my truck. I finally found the apartment clean and freshly painted. I stayed in my truck, watching to see if anyone was in when, right at that moment, a new car pulled up to the driveway. The man, who I guess is the owner, stepped out, and I followed with the mail in hand. The man turned to me in confusion. Pretending to be delivering a package, I handed the mail to him. In 3 seconds, when he realized who it was from, his eyes widened. It surprised me how calm I was. No fist throwing, no tongue lashing, just a straight stare at the man in front of me. I noticed the woman on the other side of the door watching us curiously. His wife, I suppose. Assuring him I wouldn't make a scene, I told him to come with me, and he obliged with no hesitation. Giving his wife the excuse of going to see a friend, he entered my truck. I stopped by a phone booth along the way and called Lai. She was back home, and from the sound in the background, I could tell she was making her special tea. I gave her the news of an emergency and told her that she should meet me at her parents' house. Her instant response was expected, and I hung up, heading back to the car. I drove up to her parents' house without saying a word to the man having an affair with Lily. By the time I rounded up at her parents' house, Lily had just arrived. It wasn't subtle, her reaction, I mean. Her mouth fell open as she saw the man next to me. Her parents, who had just stepped outside, found us and were confused by what was going on. I told the man to hand the mail over to her parents and explain himself. It didn't take too long for my wife to start crying. She tried to explain, but her sobs made it hard for her. The man she was having an affair with understood that the jig was up and explained that this had been going on for months. They had met at a parent-teacher meeting in school, and he had shown interest in her, even knowing she was married. Lai never tried to turn him down. Instead, she bathed in his attention and made it something more. Her parents were stunned by the information. Lai was already clinging to my shirt, crying, but I brushed her off. I couldn't believe that she would betray me like this. So I told her to stay with her parents. She started crying harder, begging me not to do this to our family. Her parents were extremely upset, asking me to reconsider and trying to console their daughter, but I just left. I left the AP with them too. I wonder what they did to him after I left because her dad was looking murderous. A few days later, I filed for a divorce and sent it over to her for signing. Her parents kept on calling, as did Lai, and she kept sending me mail by morning and evening delivery in the same pink envelopes she sent AP nudes to. That's when I realized she was just incredibly dumb. I found the AP's phone number from the directory and called his wife to tell her about everything that happened between Lai and her husband. I don't know what she did with that piece of information. Some months later, my divorce was finalized. A few years down the line, I met a wonderful woman who I married and started a family with. I don't regret leaving my ex one bit because I would not have the life I have today had I not. Do not ever stay with a cheating spouse. You deserve better. My reaction: you're right, Opus, everyone deserves better than a cheating spouse. I'm glad you've healed from the heartbreak and found someone much better to spend the rest of your life with. You handled the whole thing amazingly. You were surprisingly calm. And you were right to break things off with your ex and never looked back. I bet she regrets her decision to date, but too late, you've moved on. Have a great time with your new family, Opus. Now let's get into today's second story. Here's a not-so-brief state of our situation. My 37-year-old wife's 34. Our relationship has been strained lately with her working nights and I work days because our son has special needs. A standard babysitter isn't possible, and specialized care isn't available or financially feasible. He has a few hours a week at school in a therapy setting. Otherwise, he's with one of us. Because of the schedules, we've been like ships passing in the night most days. We got 10 minutes to see each other. Not a perfect situation, and it's something I wanted to fix. I've been sleeping in the guest room so that she can decompress and get some quality sleep alone. It was not something I wanted to do, but for her benefit, I thought it would help her sleeplessness. Our sex life has been non-existent for a long time. In the past few months when we have talked, she would mention things like we should try an open relationship because I don't like sex anymore and you should be free to explore. And getting married has screwed up our finances. We should get an on-paper divorce. I never took her that seriously because she said them in such a joking tone. Lately, she has mentioned that she feels like we're great roommates. She has also wanted to go out with her friends more often on her nights off. I'm not the type for that, so I stay home with our son. Admittedly, a special needs child can be very difficult. Her having a night off was completely understandable. Come to 2 weeks ago, I asked to sit down and talk about our relationship. She agreed to talk the next day. And I actually sent her an email of questions I had on my mind. Questions like, how would you describe our relationship? And do you want to share a bed anymore? And most importantly, have you had sex outside of our marriage? We sat down after our son was in bed and had the talk. We talked for a few minutes about what she thought of our relationship. She said she doesn't see us as a couple anymore. She started to cry. Then she said, "You asked if I've had sex with anyone else." The answer is yes. It immediately hit me like a ton of bricks. I had asked the question more for peace of mind for me rather than confirmation. I had suspicions before, but I thought they were all in my head. We talked for 2 hours. I said very little, trying to keep my anger in check. But here's what was revealed. She did not want to talk about the details of the other relationship with me. That doesn't matter. She admitted to it happening more than once, and it was premeditated. She had gone out with my blessing to hang out with friends, knowing that she was going to cheat. The affair is not still going on, but she was still talking to the person. She wasn't necessarily interested in a romantic or sexual relationship outside of our marriage right now, but she's open to anything. She didn't realize until recently that she's probably not really into the whole monogamy thing. As for our relationship, we're done, and she wanted me out of the bedroom completely. She wants to remain in the house to co-parent. Not just because we have to, but because she wants to. You're a great dad, and that part of you I still really care about, she kept saying. We don't have to make any decisions right now, and I know it's a lot. Also, I don't hate you. I still care about you, and I'm sure you hate me. Since then, I've moved upstairs. I've initiated a separation of our finances and healthcare. That conversation resulted in her crying and saying, "This is a lot right now." But she has relented. She has also said that she's depressed and mourning losing her best friends and retreats to her room frequently. I've mentioned divorce, her moving out, and selling the house, all of which are returned with vague warnings of expense and difficulty and disrupting our son. Conversations with my friends say she's gaslighting me or manipulating the situation so that she gets to have her cake and eat it too. I've come to believe that having her move out may be difficult for our son. But it's what's best for my mental health, and that's ultimately best for my son. But I have no idea how to make it happen. I feel so lost and broken. Just typing this up has taken a few days because I can't get through it all. All I think about is how I wanted to fix our relationship and how she put someone else above spending time with us. She used my dependability as a father for her selfish reasons. Then I think about being kind to her so that she can stay in our child's life. He will need both of us. It is sadness, then pain, then anger, then a few minutes of numbness before it starts again. Merry Christmas to me. I'll also add a few more pieces of information. As I said below, some of the nights out were explained as work-related social events or with friends for work that I don't know. Obviously now I can't trust that information very much. I'm sure that one of those nights she cheated. It was described as a mom's night off where I took my son to play at an indoor playground so wayward spouse could get ready and then take an Uber out to a bar. Brutal when I realized that one. but I do know some of her friends. One of those friends is actually a female friend of mine from before the relationship. Let's call her Fran. Fran has not been in contact with my spouse, but I've told her the situation, and she's been helping me very kindly. I haven't asked her to verify any alibis. I also learned through Fran that my spouse had told other mutual friends that her AP has a girlfriend. The girlfriend knows about the affair, and AP is trying to repair that relationship. I don't know where that leaves my spouse or even how much I can trust Fran's information. She has apologized indirectly. She said, "I'm sorry that I hurt you," but she also explicitly said that she does not regret cheating. This week, she works most days, but we're going to try and have a normal Christmas Eve and day. Then I'm taking my son to see my family this weekend. I'll tell them what's going on. She told her mom that we are not together and that she cheated. Her mom is sad about the situation. I'm talking about her moving out. She refuses to leave until we sell the house or I buy it back alone. And she gets her share of the equity. She said that's fair if you're going to kick me out. Also, she said that if I tried to stop her from seeing our child, she would fight it. Those are the only two things she has been forceful or antagonistic about. She's open to seeing a divorce attorney or mediator whenever I want. I realized reading the above, I may have made her out to be more manipulative and colder than she may be, but the facts are correct, so judge us as you will. Opus. My reaction: I'm sorry this happened to you. You sound like you're a wonderful dad and a good husband. From changing the sleeping arrangements so she could sleep better to you watching her son while she went out with friends. What sucks is that she sounds selfish, and all of this puts herself over you and your relationship. I think your stance of wanting her out is the best route to take. Get the divorce done and sell the house. Do not reward her crappy behavior. Good luck, and I wish you and your son the very best. Another story. This has been a long, heartbreaking, emasculated process. I married my wife 5 years ago. It hadn't been smooth sailing up to that point though. We dated on and off for about 4 years. She had addiction problems which lead to infidelity on a few occasions. Once I caught her upstairs at a party in the act. I was so embarrassed I just left. She begged for another chance. I loved her and knew she wasn't herself. She got into a program and got sober. Things were beautiful. Our relationship was strong and we got married. First year of our marriage was perfect. Second year, not so much. A lot of bickering, but nothing I didn't think we could work through. Third year is when things got bad. She got drunk and cheated on me with a friend of mine. Obviously, this hurt me deeply, but she begged for forgiveness. I knew she had been drinking and convinced myself that's the only reason it happened. I wanted my marriage to work, so I forgave her under the condition that she wouldn't touch alcohol. Things went well for a bit, but I began to hear rumors at work. We worked at the same company. I don't like to pay attention to rumors, but given our history, it ate at me. Was never specific, but just people talking and alluding to things you know. I questioned her. She denied everything. We had arguments, but I thought maybe I'm getting worked up for nothing. Figured it wasn't fair to get on her about he said, she said. Then one Friday I was going into work. She had the day off. I was gone a couple hours, but ended up getting sent home early. I get home and there's a random truck in our driveway. I go inside and I know what I hear, but I'm in disbelief. Thumping, squeaky, and moaning. Saying that my heart sank is an understatement. I walk towards the bedroom. The door's open and I see her having sex with our supervisor. I think my heart stopped. I left. I had to because I didn't want to do what I thought about doing. I drove with no destination. Finally pulled over and cried my eyes out. I felt stupid for not leaving before. I felt like a pushover. I felt emasculated. I felt like less than a man for not doing something in the moment. I drove back home, but they were both gone. I broke things, screamed, cried, and sat on the floor. She comes home with her friend and asks what the hell happened. I just started screaming at her. I was out of my mind. Eventually they left. She came back the next morning. Didn't speak all weekend, and then I went back to work Monday. As soon as I saw the supervisor, I made a beeline for him and connected a few times before it got separated. I screamed and looked crazy, I'm sure. Obviously, I was fired, but thankfully no charges were filed. I filed for divorce that week, which she didn't contest. Obviously, the process takes a bit regardless. Problem was we were still living together. I just avoided as much as I could. I was going to stay with my uncle, which I got strung along with that, and it never happened. Had no one else I could stay with at that point, so had to still be there while trying to save up. At this point, my wife didn't give a damn. She didn't even hide that she was seeing other people, even sneaking men into the house late at night. Had to hear things more than once. I didn't want to go to jail for doing something stupid, but did want to see if there was anything I could do legally, which I was advised that there wasn't. So she's have her good times while I'm living in misery. But finally, I got my own spot. I moved out without a word. Divorce has been finalized. Splitting belongings was simple. I'm happy that it's done, but I'd be lying if I said I felt like myself. I'm colder. I'm negative. I'm just not me. I know it takes time to get get through this. I know it was smart of me to just leave the house when I caught them, but that decision also eats at me. Yes, I know I should have ended things earlier. It's easy to say that on hindsight. We all wanted our relationships to work and some of us took more than others. I just wanted to get this off my chest. Just needed to vent. Sorry if this post might be all over the place. That's the story. If you liked it, please support us with a like as well as subscribe to our channel. Write in the comments what you think about the story. Thank you for being here with us.
Ethan Wright had spent the last 5 years of his marriage believing he and Clara were building something unshakable. Their life together wasn't extraordinary by any means, but it was the kind of quiet happiness Ethan valued. They had a charming suburban home, a rescue dog named Max, and shared dreams of someday raising a family. Ethan, a middle school science teacher, found joy in small things: a successful lesson plan, the smell of freshly brewed coffee, and Clara's laugh on a lazy Saturday morning. But over the past year, something had shifted. Clara, a corporate attorney at a prestigious firm, had become more distant. Ethan chalked it up to her demanding job. She often worked late hours, juggling contracts and court appearances. He admired her ambition, but the long nights and strained conversations over dinner began to gnaw at him. It wasn't until the night of the first snowstorm in December that Ethan realized just how deeply the cracks in their marriage ran. "I'll be home late," Clara had said that evening, her voice tinged with exhaustion. "Work's a mess, and I need to finish drafting a brief for tomorrow." Ethan had hesitated before responding. "Do you want me to bring you dinner? I could swing by with something warm." There was a pause on the line, long enough to make Ethan's stomach churn. "No, it's fine," Clara said quickly. "I'll grab something here." The call ended abruptly, leaving Ethan staring at his phone. Something about her tone unsettled him, but he shrugged it off. Clara was stressed. He had no reason to doubt her, or so he thought. As the snowstorm intensified, Ethan's concern grew. The roads were icy, and Clara's car wasn't built for the slick conditions. Deciding to surprise her, he grabbed his coat and keys, telling Max, "Stay here, boy. I'll be back soon." Driving to her office was slow and treacherous. The city was blanketed in white, the streetlights casting an eerie glow on the empty roads. When he finally pulled into the parking lot of Clara's firm, Ethan's breath caught in his throat. There she was stepping out of the building. But she wasn't alone. A man stood beside her, tall and impeccably dressed, holding an umbrella over both their heads. Clara laughed at something he said, the kind of laugh Ethan hadn't heard in months. Then the man's arm slid around her waist, pulling her closer as they walked toward the lot. Ethan's knuckles turned white as he gripped the steering wheel. His chest tightened, a storm of emotions crashing inside him. Confusion, anger, and an aching sense of betrayal. He couldn't stop himself. Pulling his truck into their path, he rolled down the window and called out, "Clara." The color drained from her face. Her companion froze, his hand still on her waist, as if debating whether to release her or confront Ethan. "Get in the truck," Ethan said, his voice low and cold. Clara stammered, stepping away from the man. "Ethan, I said get in." The man's jaw tightened. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice tinged with arrogance. Ethan turned his gaze to him, his eyes hard as steel. "No problem. Just taking my wife home." Clara climbed into the truck without another word, her head bowed. Ethan didn't spare the man another glance as he drove away, the silence in the cab suffocating. The ride home was a blur of tension. Ethan's mind raced with questions, but he didn't speak until they were parked in their driveway. "How long has it been going on?" he asked, his voice raw. Clara stared at her lap, her fingers twisting nervously. "It's not what you think. Don't lie to me, Clara." Her shoulders sagged. "It hasn't gone that far. We haven't. I haven't cheated, Ethan." He scoffed. "Really? So laughing in another man's arms isn't cheating now?" "It's not like that," she insisted, her voice trembling. "Ryan is just a friend. I've been feeling trapped, Ethan. And he's exciting." Ethan felt as if the ground had shifted beneath him. "Trapped? What the hell does that mean?" Clara hesitated, her face contorting with guilt. "I love you, Ethan, but I've never had anything else. You're the only man I've ever been with. I don't know who I am anymore." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. For years, he had thought their life together was enough. But for Clara, It wasn't. The days following the snowstorm were an uneasy truce in the Wright household. Clara moved through their home like a ghost, avoiding prolonged conversations with Ethan. When they did speak, her words were measured, as if afraid of igniting the powder keg that now simmered between them. Ethan, for his part, kept his emotions bottled up. His usual calm demeanor had been replaced by a quiet tension that hung in the air. But underneath his controlled exterior, a storm was brewing. He replayed Clara's words over and over. "I don't know who I am anymore." Clara's guilt gnawed at her. She told herself she wasn't a bad person. She hadn't crossed any lines, not really. Ryan was just a co-worker who had shown her attention when she felt unappreciated. And yet she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him. At work, Ryan Carter was everything Ethan wasn't. He was charming, confident, and exuded an effortless magnetism that drew people to him. It wasn't just Clara who felt it. The women in the office openly flirted with him, even the married ones. Clara had resisted at first. When Ryan began complimenting her outfits, she brushed it off. When he offered to take her to lunch, she declined. But over time, his persistence chipped away at her defenses. She started looking forward to their conversations, the way his eyes lingered on her just a little too long. One afternoon, Ryan found her in the break room, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "Rough day?" he asked, leaning casually against the counter. Clara glanced at him and gave a small smile. "Aren't they all?" He chuckled. "True, but you look like you're carrying the weight of the world." She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the mug. "Just things at home. It's been a little tense lately." Ryan's expression softened. "Trouble in paradise?" Clara's cheeks flushed. "Something like that?" "Hey," he said, his voice gentle. "You deserve to be happy, Clara. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Her heart skipped a beat at his words. She knew they were dangerous, knew she shouldn't be standing there, letting him look at her like that. But in that moment, she didn't care. Ethan wasn't blind to Clara's growing distance. She started coming home later and later, offering flimsy excuses about work deadlines. Her phone was glued to her hand, and when he entered the room, she would quickly put it away. One evening, Ethan's curiosity got the better of him. While Clara was in the shower, he picked up her phone from the nightstand. It was locked, but a notification lit up the screen. "Ryan, had a great time at lunch today. Let me know when you can get away again." Ethan's jaw clenched. He didn't need to see the rest of the messages to know what was happening. That night, as Clara slept beside him, Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Rage bubbled beneath the surface, but he forced himself to think clearly. He wouldn't confront her, not yet. If she was determined to blow up their marriage, he would make sure she paid the price. Ethan's plan began to take shape. He spent his free time researching Ryan Carter, digging into every corner of the man's life. It didn't take long to uncover the skeletons in Ryan's closet. Ryan had a reputation for seducing married women, leaving a trail of broken relationships and ruined careers in his wake. There were rumors of hush money paid to keep affairs quiet and questionable financial dealings that skirted the edge of legality. Ethan documented everything. He compiled a folder of emails, photos, and records that painted Ryan as a predator and a fraud. But it wasn't enough to expose Ryan. Ethan wanted Clara to feel the weight of her betrayal, too. He began quietly preparing for the day he would walk away, leaving her to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. The tipping point came on a Friday evening in late January. Clara announced she was going away for the weekend to attend a work retreat. Ethan knew better. He watched from the living room window as Clara loaded her overnight bag into the car and drove away. The knot in his chest tightened, but he forced himself to stay calm. This was part of the plan. Clara arrived at Ryan's house with a mixture of excitement and nerves. She had told herself this weekend was a one-time thing, a chance to finally satisfy her curiosity and move on. Ryan greeted her at the door with his signature grin. "You made it," he said, pulling her into a warm embrace. For the next 2 days, Clara let herself forget everything. Her marriage, her guilt, her carefully constructed life. She was swept up in Ryan's charm, losing herself in the fantasy he offered. But what she didn't realize was that Ethan had been one step ahead of her. While Clara was away, Ethan put the final pieces of his plan into motion. Using the information he had gathered, He set up an anonymous email account and sent Ryan's incriminating records to key figures in his workplace. He also reached out to a private investigator to ensure Clara's weekend escapades were documented. Photos of her entering and leaving Ryan's house, timestamps, and witness accounts were added to Ethan's growing arsenal of evidence. By the time Clara returned home on Sunday night, Ethan was gone. Clara pulled into the driveway late Sunday evening, the familiar sight of her home bringing a strange mixture of relief and apprehension. She hadn't been able to fully enjoy her weekend with Ryan. Guilt had lingered in the back of her mind like a shadow. But she told herself that once this was over, she could move forward with Ethan, free of her nagging doubts. As she stepped inside, her heart sank. The house was eerily silent, the lights dimmed. Max, who usually greeted her enthusiastically, was nowhere to be seen. "Ethan," she called, her voice echoing in the empty space. There was no response. Clara moved from room to room, her unease growing with every step. When she reached their bedroom, her stomach dropped. Ethan's dresser drawers were empty. His closet, once filled with neatly pressed shirts, now looked barren. On the bed was a single envelope with her name written in Ethan's precise handwriting. With trembling hands, Clara opened it. "Clara, I've thought long and hard about this. You made your choices, and now I'm making mine. I've taken what I need and left the rest. The house is yours for now, though I don't think you'll find much comfort in it. Max is with me. He's better off that way. You wanted freedom. Now you have it. Let's see what you do with it. Ethan." The letter slipped from Clara's hands as the enormity of what she had done hit her. Ethan was gone. He hadn't yelled, fought, or even confronted her. Instead, he had silently walked away, taking with him the stability she had taken for granted. Desperation clawed at her as she grabbed her phone and dialed his number. It went straight to voicemail. "Ethan, please call me back," she begged. "We could talk about this. I didn't mean for things to go this far. I love you." But the line remained silent, just like the house around her. Ethan had planned his departure meticulously. He didn't want to simply leave Clara. He wanted her and Ryan to feel the full weight of their betrayal. His first step had been removing himself from her life entirely. He transferred their joint savings account into a private one and used the money to purchase a small sailboat. For months, he had been preparing for this escape, using weekends to learn the basics of sailing and mapping out his route south. Now, as he sailed down the Hudson River with Max by his side, Ethan felt a strange sense of peace. The cold winter air bit at his face, but the rhythmic sway of the boat soothed his nerves. This was freedom, not the reckless kind Clara had sought, but the deliberate, empowering kind he had earned. Ethan's next step was dismantling Ryan's life. The evidence he had gathered, emails, financial records, and photographs, was already in the hands of Ryan's employer. Within days, Ryan's office was abuzz with scandal. An anonymous email had been sent to the HR department, detailing his affair with Clara and attaching incriminating photos of their weekend together. It wasn't just an affair that Ethan exposed. The email also included documentation of Ryan's questionable financial dealings. Ryan was called into an emergency meeting with the company's legal team. By the time he left the office, his promotion had been revoked, and he was placed on unpaid leave pending an investigation. Clara spent the days after Ethan's departure in a haze. The house, once a sanctuary, felt like a prison. Her friends, many of whom had admired Ethan, began to distance themselves. Word of the affair had spread quickly. Clara's best friend, Amanda, called her the morning after Ethan left. "Clara," Amanda began, her voice laced with disappointment. "Is it true?" Clara hesitated. "Is what true? Ethan's gone because you cheated on him?" The words hit Clara like a slap. "I didn't cheat," she protested weakly. "It was complicated." "Complicated?" Amanda's voice hardened. "You had a good man, Clara, and you threw him away for what? A fling with some coworker?" Tears welled in Clara's eyes. "You don't understand." "No, I don't," Amanda said coldly. "And honestly, I don't think I want to. Call me when you've figured out your life." The line went dead, leaving Clara feeling more alone than ever. Ryan's confidence crumbled as the consequences of his actions piled up. The suspension from his job was just the beginning. Ethan had made sure Ryan's personal life was equally affected. Ryan's fiancée, a woman Clara hadn't known existed, received a package in the mail containing photographs of Ryan and Clara together. Accompanying the photos was a typed note. "This is the man you're planning to marry. Thought you should know." The engagement ended in spectacular fashion, with Ryan's fiancée throwing him out of their shared apartment. At work, the financial investigation uncovered irregularities that couldn't be ignored. Ryan was fired, and whispers of a potential lawsuit began circulating. By the time the dust settled, Ryan was left jobless, homeless, and utterly humiliated. Weeks turned into months, and Clara's life continued to spiral. The house that had once felt warm and inviting now seemed cold and hollow. She tried reaching out to Ethan again and again, but he never answered. Her emails went unread, her voicemails unreturned. For the first time, Clara truly understood what she had lost. Ethan had been her rock, the man who loved her unconditionally. She had taken his quiet strength for granted, thinking she needed excitement to feel alive. Now, all she felt was regret. Ethan's new life in Florida was a stark contrast to the one he had left behind. The marina where he docked his sailboat became his haven, and the ocean his escape. He took a job with a marine research institute, finally fulfilling the dream he had put on hold for so many years. The work was challenging but rewarding, and for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt truly alive. Max became a beloved fixture at the marina, his boundless energy and friendly demeanor endearing him to everyone. Ethan wasn't in a rush to find love again, but he didn't close himself off to the possibility. For now, he was content with his freedom and the knowledge that he had reclaimed his life. Clara couldn't shake the void Ethan's absence had left. She tried throwing herself into work, but even her once-beloved career felt meaningless. Ryan had vanished from her life entirely, and the fallout from their affair had left her reputation in shambles. One evening, as she sat alone in the living room nursing a glass of wine, Clara found herself scrolling through old photos on her phone. There were countless pictures of her and Ethan, vacations, holidays, quiet nights at home. Tears streamed down her face as she realized how much she had taken for granted. Ethan's steady presence had been the glue that held her life together, and now that he was gone, everything felt fractured. Desperate for closure, Clara reached out to Amanda again, hoping to mend at least one relationship. "Amanda, it's me," Clara said hesitantly when her friend picked up the phone. "I know I don't deserve your time, but I need to talk to someone." There was a long pause before Amanda responded. "I'm listening. I've lost everything," Clara admitted, her voice cracking. "Ethan's gone, Ryan's out of the picture, and I don't even know who I am anymore." Amanda sighed. "Clara, I don't know what you want me to say. You had a great life with Ethan, and you threw it away." "Why?" "I thought I needed more," Clara whispered. "But I was wrong. I was so wrong." Amanda's tone softened slightly. "Do you think Ethan would ever take you back?" Clara shook her head, even though Amanda couldn't see her. "He's moved on. I know he has. I need to tell him I'm sorry." Determined to at least apologize, Clara began searching for Ethan. She called old friends, reached out to his coworkers, and even tried contacting his parents. Eventually, she learned that he had relocated to Florida, living near a marina and working for a marine research institute. Clara booked a flight without hesitation. She knew the odds of Ethan forgiving her were slim, but she couldn't live with herself if she didn't try. When Clara arrived at the marina, the salty sea air hit her like a wave of nostalgia. She spotted Ethan's boat docked at the end of a pier, the name Serenity painted in bold letters on its side. As she approached, she saw Ethan sitting on the deck, laughing with a small group of people. Max lay at his feet, his tail wagging happily. For a moment, Clara froze. Ethan looked so content. He was tanned and relaxed, a stark contrast to the quiet, reserved man she had left behind. When Ethan's eyes met hers, his expression shifted. The laughter faded, replaced by a guarded look she hadn't seen before. "Ethan," Clara said softly, stepping closer. "Can we talk?" Ethan stood, his posture calm but firm. "What are you doing here, Clara?" "I needed to see you," she admitted. "I needed to say I'm sorry. For everything." Ethan crossed his arms, his gaze steady. You don't owe me an apology, Clara. You made your choices, and I made mine. I was wrong, she said, her voice trembling. I thought I needed excitement, but what I needed was you. I see that now. Ethan shook his head, a bittersweet smile tugging at his lips. It's too late for that, Clara. I've moved on. I've found peace here, and I'm not going to let the past drag me back. Tears welled in Clara's eyes. I don't expect you to forgive me. I needed you to know how sorry I am. For a moment, Ethan said nothing. Then he nodded. I hope you find peace, Clara. But it's not going to be with me. As Clara walked away from the marina, she felt both devastated and strangely relieved. She had done what she came to do, and while Ethan's rejection stung, she knew it was what she deserved. For Ethan, seeing Clara again was a reminder of how far he had come. Her apology didn't erase the pain she had caused, but it reaffirmed his decision to leave. That evening, as the sun set over the water, Ethan sat on the deck of his boat with Max by his side. The past no longer weighed him down, and the horizon stretched before him, full of possibility. Clara spent the next few weeks reflecting on the conversation with Ethan. She had known it would be difficult, but the weight of finally confronting the past was heavier than she had imagined. In some ways, it felt like a door had been closed, firmly, with no room for negotiation. But in other ways, it felt like the first step toward reclaiming herself. She had spent so many years caught up in her own mistakes and fears, always running from the truth, always trying to fix something that wasn't meant to be fixed. But now, she realized she couldn't keep doing that. She couldn't keep waiting for forgiveness, for someone else to validate her pain. The only person who could set her free was herself. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. She had broken relationships and lost trust. But as she sat alone in her small apartment, the silence around her felt less suffocating than it had before. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel hopeful, not because the past was gone or forgiven, but because she had the power to change her future. Clara started small. She picked up the pieces of her life, literally and figuratively. She began rearranging her apartment, throwing out old things that reminded her of Ethan, of the mistakes she had made. She kept a few mementos, though, the ones that held good memories, the ones that reminded her of who she had been before everything fell apart. Those were the pieces of herself she still wanted to hold on to. One day, she found an old journal she had kept during the early days of her relationship with Ethan. As she flipped through the pages, reading about their shared dreams and the way they had seen the world together, she felt a pang of sorrow. But this time, it wasn't a crushing blow. It was a quiet acceptance of the fact that some things were just not meant to last. And that was okay. Meanwhile, Ethan continued his life with a newfound sense of purpose. He had always been a man of action, but now there was a calmness to him, a steadiness that wasn't there before. He had embraced the changes in his life, not out of necessity, but out of a deep understanding of who he had become and who he was meant to be. Max had remained by his side, as loyal and comforting as always. The bond between them had deepened, and Ethan often found himself confiding in the dog during his quiet walks along the shore. Max never judged him. He was just there, always ready to listen with his warm, understanding eyes. Ethan had also decided to start anew. He was taking on projects he had once put off, focusing on building a career that felt true to who he was. But the biggest change came when he enrolled in therapy. He had realized that while he had healed in many ways, there were still parts of himself that needed care and attention. He wasn't just moving forward. He was actively working to become the best version of himself, something he hadn't thought possible a year ago. One afternoon, months after their last meeting, Clara received a message from Ethan. Her heart skipped a beat as she read the simple, unassuming text. I hope you're doing well. Take care of yourself. It was brief, but it held something that Clara couldn't quite define. She sat for a long time, staring at the message, unsure of what to do with it. Did it mean something more? Or was it just a gesture of kindness? She decided not to overthink it. This was not the time for questions or possibilities. This was about moving forward. She replied simply, "Thank you. I hope you are too." And that was it. A quiet acknowledgement of where they had both been and where they were going now. As the seasons changed, Clara found herself rebuilding. She reconnected with old friends she had lost touch with during the years she had been consumed by her relationship with Ethan. She took up painting again, something she had loved before life had become so complicated. The colors on her canvas seemed to brighten with each stroke, as if the act of creating was slowly mending the wounds she had kept hidden for so long. Ethan, on the other hand, continued to build his life with quiet strength. He had learned that the hardest thing to do wasn't just moving on, it was allowing himself to grow from the pain. He had learned that he was worthy of peace, of happiness, and of the life he had always dreamed of. It was in these small, seemingly insignificant moments that both Ethan and Clara found what they had been searching for all along. Not the past, but the future. The past had been a teacher, but it no longer had control over them. They had both learned their lessons and were now free to chart their own paths. The future, though unknown and uncertain, was waiting for them, separate but somehow still intertwined in a way that only time could explain. Clara stood in front of her canvas one evening, painting a scene that seemed to reflect her journey, a path stretching through a quiet forest, the sunlight filtering through the trees. It was a symbol of the road she had traveled and the road ahead, both filled with light and shadows, but ultimately hers to navigate. And somewhere far away, Ethan walked the same path, in his own time, in his own way. But they both knew that no matter where life took them, they had learned what it meant to let go, and what it meant to finally heal. Months had passed since that brief exchange between Clara and Ethan. Life, as it often does, had moved on. Yet, there was an undeniable feeling that both of them, in their own separate worlds, were still carrying the imprint of their past. It was a part of them, an integral chapter in the story of their lives. But neither of them was defined by it anymore. They were both walking in the present, not in the shadow of what had been. Clara had recently taken a bold step, one she hadn't expected to take so soon. She had started to date again. It wasn't something she had rushed into. She'd met someone at an art gallery opening, a quiet man named Daniel who had a gentle smile and an easygoing nature. He wasn't like Ethan. There were no fireworks, no grand gestures, but there was something steady and warm about him. At first, Clara hesitated. She wasn't sure if she was ready to open her heart to someone new. But Daniel's patience and kindness gave her the space she needed to heal at her own pace. They went on casual dates, walking through the city's parks, visiting museums, cooking dinner together. There was no pressure. It was just two people learning about each other, with no expectations but kindness and respect. It was different this time. Clara didn't need Daniel to fix anything for her. She was already in the process of rebuilding herself. He wasn't a man she was clinging to for validation or answers. He was simply someone who shared her present, with the possibility of a future that had no past to weigh it down. Ethan, too, had started to notice small changes in his life. He was finding joy in the simple things, a quiet morning with coffee, his walks with Max, a good book. He had been putting himself out there more, meeting new people, but unlike before, he wasn't searching for something to fill a void. He was learning to appreciate his own company first. One evening, he found himself at a cafe, a place he had often gone to with Clara. He hadn't planned on being there, but the familiarity of the setting drew him in. As he sat with his coffee, reading a book, he noticed a woman at the next table. She was sketching in a notebook, her attention focused on her work, the soft hum of the cafe blending with the sound of her pencil on paper. Something about her caught his attention. She wasn't anyone he recognized, but there was a calmness about her that mirrored his own sense of peace. As the evening wore on, he felt a gentle pull toward her. It wasn't the kind of attraction that hit you like a wave. It was slow, deliberate, like the quiet unfolding of a new chapter. When she stood up to leave, Ethan found himself standing as well, without fully knowing why. She glanced up at him as she passed. "Hey," he said almost instinctively. She smiled. "Hi, I haven't seen you around here before." "I come here often," he replied. "I guess we're both creatures of habit." She chuckled, then tilted her head. "I'm Emily, by the way." "Ethan," he introduced himself. "Nice to meet you." For a moment, they simply stood there, the faint noise of the cafe surrounding them. Neither of them seemed in a rush to leave. and neither seemed to have any particular expectations. It was just two people sharing a quiet moment in a place they both found peaceful. Over the next few weeks, Ethan and Emily ran into each other several times. At first, it was casual, a simple exchange of pleasantries. But each time they spoke, there was something more, an easy connection, a feeling of being seen for who they truly were, not who they used to be. They began spending time together outside the cafe. It was nothing serious, just conversations about their lives, their passions, their moments of silence. Ethan found himself laughing more, feeling more at ease than he had in a long time. He wasn't thinking about Clara, about his past, or the mistakes he had made. He was simply present with Emily, and for the first time in a long while, he was enjoying the company of someone new, without the weight of old regrets. It wasn't until one evening, after a walk through the park, that Emily turned to him with a question that made him pause. "Do you ever think about the past?" she asked, her voice soft, yet full of curiosity. Ethan thought for a moment. He had always tried to push the past away, to move forward, but Emily's question made him reflect in a way he hadn't in a while. "I think about it sometimes," he said slowly, "but I don't live there anymore. I think the past taught me a lot, but it doesn't get to define who I am now." Emily nodded, as if she understood. She smiled, her eyes gentle. "I like that. It's a good way to live." Clara, too, was learning to navigate her own past. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't always clear. But with Daniel, with her art, with the support of friends who had been there for her all along, she was slowly understanding that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about accepting and growing beyond what had once hurt. One evening, as she worked on a painting in her studio, Clara felt a surge of inspiration. She stood in front of the canvas, her brushes moving fluidly, the colors blending together to create a scene that felt both familiar and new. It was the image of a bridge, a beautiful, weathered bridge spanning over a river, the water calm and clear beneath it. It was a symbol of her own journey, the difficult, yet necessary, crossing from one side of herself to the other. The past wasn't something to escape. It was a part of her that she could build from. When the painting was done, Clara stepped back to look at it, feeling a quiet satisfaction. She wasn't finished with her journey, but for the first time in a long while, she could see where she was going. As the year came to a close, both Ethan and Clara found themselves standing at the edges of new beginnings. They had both taken different paths, paths that were no longer defined by their past, but by the people they were becoming. And though they no longer shared the same space, the same dreams, or the same story, they each held a quiet understanding. The road ahead, though uncertain, was theirs to walk. They had both learned what it meant to heal, to move on, and to embrace the possibility of a future they could shape with their own hands. As the new year dawned, the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Ethan and Clara were no longer tethered to their pasts, yet they weren't entirely free from the echoes of those old wounds. But they had both learned something invaluable. They could live beyond them. Life was a mosaic of moments, some bright, others shadowed, but each one leading them towards something more. Ethan had slowly grown closer to Emily. They'd become inseparable in a way that was gentle, unforced. There was no rush, no urgency to their relationship, just a quiet understanding that sometimes the best connections weren't the ones that burned brightest, but the ones that grew steadily, like a plant finding its way toward the sun. Emily, for her part, had helped him rediscover a sense of joy he thought had been lost. With her, there were no ghosts, no unresolved questions, only the simple beauty of sharing a life, even in its small moments. Ethan had learned to love again, but this time, it was without the burden of needing to fix or prove anything. He no longer saw love as something to be fought for or chased. With Emily, it was simply a part of who they were, a quiet thing that blossomed with time. They spent weekends exploring art galleries, taking long hikes, cooking meals together, and in the soft hours of the evening, they'd talk about their hopes, their pasts, and everything in between. Clara, too, had found a rhythm in her life. Her relationship with Daniel had grown into something solid, something she wasn't afraid to call real. They complimented each other in the way that only two people who had been through their own personal trials could. Daniel never pressured her. He let her be who she was, and in return, she did the same for him. There was a comfort in their connection that she had never expected. They laughed together, supported each other's dreams, and cherished the quiet moments of just being. Clara had also dedicated herself to her art more than ever. She had started to exhibit her paintings at small galleries around the city, her work gaining attention for its emotional depth and raw vulnerability. People saw her paintings and felt them, understood that each stroke held a part of her journey, her healing, her growth, and her resilience. She realized that her art had been the one thing that truly kept her grounded during the storms of her life. It had always been there, waiting for her to find herself again. Months passed, and with each one, the future unfolded in unexpected ways. Ethan and Clara's lives continued on their separate paths, but the shadow of their past relationship no longer lingered. They were no longer waiting for the other to change or to be a part of their story. They had found new chapters, new loves, new identities. One afternoon, Clara was at the gallery preparing for an exhibition opening when she received a message. It was from Ethan. Her heart didn't race like it once had, but there was a tinge of curiosity, a gentle knowing that whatever the message was, it wasn't about the past. "Clara," the message began, "I hope you're doing well. I've been thinking about you lately. Not in the way I used to, but with gratitude. I'm glad you found your way. You deserve happiness, and I hope you're living it. I'm doing okay, too. Thanks for the memories we shared. Wishing you all the best." Clara read the message twice, the words settling in her chest like a soft weight. She had often wondered what Ethan had become, but now she saw him, not as the man she had loved and lost, but as someone who had, like her, moved forward. She smiled to herself, her fingers brushing over the edge of her phone. She replied simply, "I'm glad to hear that. Wishing you peace, Ethan." There was no bitterness, no longing, just acceptance. They had each been a chapter in the other's story, but they were no longer bound by it. They had grown, moved on, and found the strength to live their lives independently. And that, Clara realized, was enough. Ethan read Clara's reply with a quiet sense of closure. He'd never expected this message, but it felt like a full-circle moment, one that left him feeling lighter than he had in years. He had loved her once, but he no longer needed her to be part of his future. He had found peace in his own life, in his relationship with Emily, in the moments that were simply his own. He thought about Clara, about all that had been, and then, with a final sense of release, he set the phone down. He wasn't holding on to anything anymore. It was time to embrace the present, to continue building his future, just as she was. As the months unfolded into another year, Ethan and Clara continued on their respective journeys. They occasionally thought of each other, but there was no longing or regret. Only a quiet sense of gratitude for the lessons they had learned, the growth they had experienced, and the love they had once shared. They had both come to understand that love, in its truest form, was not about possession or expectation. It was about growth, release, and the quiet joy of seeing the other person flourish. Their stories were different now, but in some small way, they had shaped each other into the people they had become. And with that understanding, they both looked ahead, knowing that the future was an open road, waiting for them to walk it, side by side with the people they had chosen to be. Ethan Carter stood in the doorway of his kitchen, frozen, the faint clinking of the coffee pot against the counter breaking the silence. The air felt heavy, charged with Amanda's words, still hanging in the space between them like a sword poised to fall. "I want freedom, Ethan. I need to explore what's out there. This, US, isn't enough for me anymore." Amanda leaned against the fridge, her arms crossed in what seemed like defiance, but was clearly a shield against the weight of her confession. Her dark workout gear clung to her athletic frame, her posture deceptively casual, as though she weren't actively dismantling 12 years of marriage with one breath. Ethan's brow furrowed. His mind struggled to catch up. Just moments ago, he'd been preoccupied with his usual morning rush, brewing coffee, checking the day's schedule, and ensuring Lila and Jake were ready for school. And now his wife of more than a decade was suggesting, "What are you saying, Amanda?" His voice was steady, but it carried a sharp edge. "I'm saying," she began, pausing to bite her lip, "I need to find myself again. I need space to figure out what I want. Who I am. Space." Ethan repeated, the word bitter on his tongue. "You're not talking about space. You're talking about seeing other people, aren't you?" Amanda stiffened, and that flicker of guilt returned to her hazel eyes. "It's not just about other people. It's about rediscovering me. I've given everything to this family, and I feel like I've lost who I am." Ethan let out a short, humorless laugh. "You've lost yourself? Are you kidding me, Amanda? You run your own fitness empire. You're more successful now than you've ever been. You've got thousands of people hanging on your every word. And somehow, you're the one who feels unfulfilled." Amanda's face hardened. "You wouldn't understand," she said quietly. "You've been distant, Ethan. You're always working, always tired. We barely even talk anymore. So this is my fault?" Ethan snapped, his voice rising despite his efforts to stay calm. "I work long hours to make sure you and the kids have everything you need, and somehow that's not enough for you." "I'm not blaming you," Amanda said, though her defensive tone suggested otherwise. I need more. From life. From myself." Ethan stared at her, his anger simmering beneath the surface. She wasn't just talking about self-discovery. She was talking about breaking their vows, about shattering the family they'd built together. "I need some air," he said abruptly, grabbing his coat and heading for the door. "Ethan," Amanda began, but he was already gone. As Ethan drove aimlessly through the quiet streets of their neighborhood, his thoughts turned to the early days of their relationship. He'd met Amanda at a mutual friend's barbecue over a decade ago. She'd been full of life back then, her laugh contagious and her energy magnetic. Ethan, a shy and ambitious software engineer, had been immediately smitten. Their courtship had been whirlwind and passionate, filled with late-night conversations and shared dreams of the future. Amanda had always been a go-getter, determined to turn her passion for fitness into a career. Ethan admired her drive, her unwavering belief in herself. When they got married, it felt like the perfect union. Amanda supported Ethan through long nights of coding and the stress of launching his own app, while Ethan cheered Amanda on as she built her fitness brand from scratch. But somewhere along the way, the spark they'd once shared began to fade. Ethan's work consumed him, leaving little time for romantic gestures or deep conversations. Amanda's business took off, and her focus shifted from their family to her growing online presence. Ethan had assumed they were simply going through a rough patch, that they'd find their way back to each other eventually. But now, with Amanda's shocking confession still ringing in his ears, he realized he might have been wrong. While Ethan was grappling with the unraveling of their marriage, Amanda was navigating a dangerous new path. Derek Matthews had entered her life 6 months ago, a charismatic entrepreneur she'd met during a charity event at her gym. Derek was the kind of man who commanded attention wherever he went. Charming, confident, and unapologetically bold. At first, their interactions were professional. Derek had approached Amanda with a business proposition, a joint venture combining her fitness expertise with his marketing prowess. Their meetings were frequent, their conversations lively and flirtatious. Amanda hadn't planned for it to go further, but Derek had a way of making her feel alive, desired, and understood in a way Ethan hadn't in years. It started with harmless texts, inside jokes, compliments on her latest workout videos. Then came the late-night phone calls, the secret coffee dates, the stolen moments that left her breathless and guilt-ridden. Every time she thought about confessing, she reminded herself of how distant Ethan had been lately. She convinced herself that she deserved this, that it wasn't entirely her fault. But deep down, she knew the truth. She was crossing a line she could never uncross. Ethan wasn't blind to Amanda's changes. The late nights at the gym, the unexplained absences, the way she seemed glued to her phone. It all set off alarm bells in his mind. At first, he tried to rationalize it. Amanda was busy. She was running a successful business. But the small inconsistencies piled up. The nights when she came home smelling like expensive cologne. The text messages she quickly hid when he entered the room. The outfits he'd never seen before. ones that seemed more suited to a night out than a training session. Ethan started paying closer attention. He noticed how Amanda seemed unusually cheerful after certain meetings, and how her excuses became increasingly vague. The final straw came one evening when Amanda left her laptop open in the living room. Ethan wasn't the type to invade someone's privacy, but curiosity and a growing sense of dread got the better of him. What he found confirmed his worst fears. The messages between Amanda and Derek were explicit, leaving no room for doubt. Derek, can't stop thinking about last night. Amanda, same. I don't know how much longer I can keep this secret. Ethan's heart pounded as he scrolled through the chat history. There were photos, too. Selfies Amanda had taken in outfits he'd never seen, smiling coyly at the camera. Ethan felt a mix of anger and heartbreak as he saved everything to an encrypted folder on his computer. He didn't confront Amanda that night. Instead, he stayed up until the early hours, staring at the evidence and wondering how their marriage had come to this. The next morning, Ethan made a decision. He wasn't going to let Amanda's betrayal destroy him. If she wanted to tear their family apart, she would have to face the consequences. He began documenting everything: Amanda's schedule, her texts, her unexplained absences. He reached out to a lawyer to discuss his options and started quietly moving their joint finances into a separate account. Ethan wasn't just preparing for a divorce. He was preparing for a war. Ethan moved through the following days with a deliberate sense of purpose. To Amanda, it probably seemed like he was doing his best to maintain the peace. He still smiled at the breakfast table, still played with Lila and Jake after work, and still kissed her on the cheek before bed. But every smile, every gesture, was carefully calculated. Ethan spent his nights in his home office, combing through Amanda's emails and messages, cataloging every damning detail. He even installed a small GPS tracker on her car, a move that made him feel uneasy but necessary. If Amanda was going to lie to him about her whereabouts, he needed hard evidence to protect himself and their children. The more he uncovered, the angrier he became. Derek wasn't just charming Amanda. He was manipulating her. Derek, you deserve better than him. Amanda, I don't know. I still care about Ethan. He's a good father. Derek, a good father isn't enough. You need someone who makes you feel alive. Ethan's fists clenched as he read those words. Derek was feeding Amanda a fantasy, painting himself as her savior while sowing seeds of doubt about her marriage. But Ethan wasn't about to let Derek win. The perfect opportunity presented itself one Saturday morning. Amanda had told Ethan she was meeting her friends for brunch. Go have fun, Ethan said, keeping his tone light. I'll watch the kids. Amanda hesitated in the doorway, a flicker of guilt crossing her face. You sure? Of course, Ethan replied, giving her a reassuring smile. As soon as Amanda's car disappeared down the street, Ethan called their babysitter, Emily. She arrived within 20 minutes, and Ethan gave her a quick rundown before heading out. His destination: a trendy downtown cafe where Amanda had unknowingly checked in on social media the week before. Ethan parked across the street and waited, his heart pounding. He didn't have to wait long. Amanda arrived with Derek in tow. Her face lit up with a smile Ethan hadn't seen in years. She leaned into Derek as they walked into the cafe, their hands brushing in a way that was far too intimate for business partners. Ethan stayed in his car, his phone camera trained on the pair. He captured every interaction: Amanda laughing at Derek's jokes, Derek brushing a strand of hair from her face, their hands briefly intertwining. When they left the cafe, Ethan followed at a safe distance. The GPS tracker on Amanda's car had already told him where they were headed, a park a few miles away. At the park, Amanda and Derek strolled hand in hand, pausing occasionally to share whispered conversations. Ethan's stomach churned as he watched them. But the final blow came when Amanda stopped abruptly, turning to face Derek. She said something Ethan couldn't hear, and Derek responded by pulling her into a kiss. Ethan felt his breath catch. This was it, the moment that shattered any lingering hope he'd had for their marriage. He snapped one last photo before leaving the park. That evening, Amanda returned home with her usual smile plastered on her face. Brunch was great, she said breezily, setting her purse on the counter. Ethan looked up from where he was playing a board game with Lila and Jake. Glad to hear it, he replied, his tone carefully neutral. Amanda hesitated, as if sensing something was off, but Ethan's demeanor gave nothing away. Over the next few days, Amanda became unusually affectionate. She hugged Ethan more often, lingered at the dinner table to chat, and even suggested a family outing to the zoo. Ethan saw through her act. She wasn't trying to reconnect. She was trying to assuage her guilt. Ethan's revenge wasn't impulsive. It was a carefully crafted plan that unfolded over weeks. He started with their finances, moving their joint savings into a new account that only he could access. He also quietly gathered records of Amanda's spending, lavish dinners, hotel stays, and gifts that were clearly meant for Derek. Next, he contacted a divorce lawyer. The evidence he'd collected gave him a strong case, and he was determined to ensure that Amanda's betrayal wouldn't cost him custody of their children or the home they'd built together. While Ethan prepared for the inevitable, Amanda's relationship with Derek began to unravel. Derek, for all his charm, was not the man Amanda had idealized him to be. As their affair progressed, his true colors began to show. He was possessive, dismissive, and quick to anger when things didn't go his way. One evening, during what Amanda thought was a romantic dinner, Derek made his intentions clear. "I'm not looking for anything serious," he said, swirling his glass of wine. Amanda stared at him, stunned. "But I thought—" "You thought what?" Derek interrupted, his tone impatient. "That I wanted to play stepdad to your kids? Come on, Amanda. You knew what this was." Amanda left the restaurant in tears, the fantasy she'd built around Derek crumbling around her. The final confrontation between Ethan and Amanda came on a Friday evening. After putting Lila and Jake to bed, Ethan found Amanda in the living room, scrolling through her phone. "We need to talk," he said, his voice calm but firm. Amanda looked up, her smile faltering when she saw his serious expression. "What's going on?" she asked cautiously. Ethan sat across from her, pulling out a folder and setting it on the coffee table. "I know about Derek," he said without preamble. "I know everything." Amanda's face went pale. "Ethan, I can explain." "Don't," Ethan interrupted. "I've read the messages. I've seen the photos. I even followed you last weekend." Amanda's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "These," Ethan continued, tapping the folder, "are divorce papers. They include evidence of your affair, along with my terms. You can either sign them, or we can go to court." Amanda stared at the folder, her hands trembling. "Ethan, please," she whispered. "Can we fix this? For the kids?" "You didn't care about the kids when you were sneaking around with Derek," Ethan replied coldly. "This isn't up for discussion. Sign the papers, or I'll make sure everyone knows the truth." Amanda sat alone in the tiny apartment she'd rented after leaving the family home. The walls were bare, the furniture sparse. It was a far cry from the warm, bustling house she'd once shared with Ethan, Lila, and Jake. Her mind replayed Ethan's cold, measured words from the confrontation. He'd been so composed, so resolute, as he laid out her betrayal and the consequences that would follow. In her hand, she clutched the divorce papers Ethan had given her. She'd signed them without a fight, knowing she had no leverage. She couldn't dispute the evidence, couldn't undo the damage she'd caused. But the worst part wasn't losing the house or the money. It was losing her family. She missed the sound of Lila's laughter, the way Jake hugged her tightly before bed, the small moments of connection she'd taken for granted. Even Derek's rejection paled in comparison to the emptiness she felt now. He had been a fleeting distraction, a shiny object that had lost its luster the moment she'd tried to make him a permanent fixture in her life. Amanda thought about reaching out to Ethan, begging him for another chance. But she knew it would be futile. The look in his eyes that night had said it all. He was done. Ethan woke up the morning after the confrontation with a sense of relief. For months, he'd been weighed down by anger and betrayal. But now, for the first time, he felt a sense of clarity. He had a new mission, to rebuild his life and create a stable, loving environment for Lila and Jake. He threw himself into his work, channeling his energy into a new project that had been sitting on the back burner. His colleagues noticed the change, commenting on his renewed focus and innovative ideas. But Ethan didn't stop at work. He made a conscious effort to spend more time with his kids, creating new routines and traditions to help them feel secure. On Saturday mornings, they started going on adventures, hikes in the nearby park, trips to the zoo, or simply exploring new parts of the city. In the evenings, they played board games or watched movies together, the three of them curled up on the couch. One evening, as Ethan was tucking Lila into bed, she looked up at him with wide, questioning eyes. "Dad," she said hesitantly, "are you and Mom ever going to get back together?" Ethan's heart ached at the vulnerability in her voice. He sat on the edge of her bed, taking her small hand in his. "Sweetheart," he began gently, "sometimes grown-ups have problems that they can't fix. But I want you to know that your mom and I both love you and Jake more than anything in the world." Lila nodded slowly, her lip quivering. "But I miss her. Why can't she come home?" Ethan swallowed the lump in his throat. "I know you miss her, and it's okay to feel that way. Your mom will always be a part of your life, even if she's not living here with us." Lila wrapped her arms around him, and Ethan held her tightly, vowing to do everything in his power to give her and Jake a sense of stability and love. As Ethan navigated his new reality, Natalie became an unexpected source of support. Their work conversations often veered into personal territory, and Ethan found himself opening up to her in a way he hadn't with anyone else. One evening, after wrapping up a late meeting, Natalie invited him to grab dinner. "You've been working yourself to the bone," she said with a smile. "You deserve a break." They went to a quiet little Italian restaurant near the office, where the conversation flowed effortlessly. Natalie shared stories about her family, her love of travel, and her passion for coding, and Ethan found himself laughing more than he had in months. As they finished their meal, Natalie looked at him with a mix of curiosity and concern. "You seem lighter lately," she said, "like you're finally letting go of something that was weighing you down." Ethan nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "I think I am. It's been a tough few months, but I'm starting to see a way forward." Natalie reached across the table and gave his hand a gentle squeeze. "You deserve that, Ethan. You really do." Meanwhile, Amanda was facing the harsh realities of her choices. Her once thriving fitness business had taken a hit after word of her affair spread through their community. Clients canceled appointments, and her social media following dwindled. But the biggest blow came when Lila and Jake began to pull away from her. During her scheduled visits, Amanda noticed that Jake seemed quieter than usual, while Lila responded to her questions with one-word answers. "Do you not want to spend time with me?" Amanda asked one afternoon, her voice trembling. Lila shrugged, not meeting her gaze. "You hurt Dad," she said simply. The words cut Amanda deeper than she thought possible. Months passed, and Ethan found himself thriving in ways he hadn't anticipated. His new project at work earned him a promotion, and his relationship with Lila and Jake grew stronger every day. One evening, as he stood in the kitchen preparing dinner, Lila came in with a piece of paper in her hand. "Dad, I made this for you," she said, handing him the drawing. It was a picture of the three of them, Ethan, Lila, and Jake, standing in front of their house smiling. Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat as he looked at the picture. It was a reminder of how far they'd come, of the family they were rebuilding together. As Ethan continued to heal, his bond with Natalie deepened. They started spending more time together outside of work, sharing coffee on Sunday mornings, taking the kids to the park, and even hosting game nights at Ethan's house. It wasn't a whirlwind romance like he'd had with Amanda, but something about it felt right. Steady. Real. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the kids play in the yard, Natalie turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "You're an incredible dad, Ethan," she said. Ethan smiled, his heart swelling at her words. "I've had a lot of motivation to step up." Natalie placed a hand on his arm. "You deserve to be happy, too. Don't forget that." As Ethan looked at her, he realized he was ready to let someone in again. Not as a rebound or a distraction, but as a true partner. Amanda, too, began to take steps toward rebuilding her life. She attended therapy, both individually and with Lila and Jake, in an effort to repair her relationship with her children. It was a slow process, but over time, the walls began to come down. Lila started opening up to her during their visits, and Jake even hugged her goodbye one afternoon. Amanda knew she would never have the life she'd once envisioned, but she was determined to create a new one. Years later, Ethan stood in the front yard of his house, watching as Lila and Jake played with Natalie's dog. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the scene. Natalie stepped outside, a mug of coffee in her hand. She joined Ethan on the porch, slipping her hand into his. "You've done an amazing job with them," she said, nodding toward the kids. Ethan smiled, a sense of peace washing over him. "We've done an amazing job," he corrected, as he looked out at the life they'd built together. Ethan realized he wasn't just surviving anymore. He was thriving, and for the first time in a long time, he was truly happy. Ethan's life settled into a new rhythm. His once chaotic days now felt structured, purposeful. He had learned to appreciate the small victories. Jake's wide grin when he scored a goal in soccer practice. Lila's excitement over mastering a new piece on the piano. He made it a point to be present for every moment, big or small. The guilt he carried for not noticing Amanda's unhappiness earlier began to fade as he realized that he couldn't have controlled her choices. One evening, as Ethan read Jake a bedtime story, the little boy interrupted him with a question that caught him off guard. "Dad," Jake asked, his eyes wide with curiosity, "why don't you and Mom live together anymore?" Ethan closed the book and looked at his son, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes grown-ups realize they aren't happy living together," he said gently. "But that doesn't mean we love you and Lila any less." Jake seemed to mull this over for a moment before nodding. "Okay," he said simply, snuggling closer to Ethan. As Ethan tucked Jake in and kissed his forehead, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. No matter what had happened with Amanda, his role as a father was unwavering. Amanda's therapy sessions forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about herself. For years, she had blamed external factors, Ethan's long work hours, her own ambitions, for the cracks in their marriage. But now, sitting across from her therapist, she had to acknowledge her own role in the destruction of their family. "You were searching for something that Derek couldn't give you," her therapist said one afternoon. "What do you think that was?" Amanda stared at the floor, tears pricking her eyes. I wanted to feel important, to feel seen. But I was so caught up in my own needs that I didn't see how much I was hurting the people I loved." The words hung in the air, heavy with regret. Through therapy, Amanda began to rebuild her relationship with Lila and Jake. She started showing up consistently, not just for scheduled visits, but for school events, recitals, and soccer games. Slowly but surely, the kids began to warm up to her. Jake started telling her about his day without prompting, and Lila began to include her in conversations about her school projects. Amanda knew she would never fully undo the damage she'd caused, but she was determined to be a better mother moving forward. Ethan's bond with Natalie deepened over time, but it wasn't rushed or dramatic. They both approached the relationship with caution, understanding that healing from their respective pasts was a journey, not a race. Natalie was a patient and steady presence in Ethan's life. She didn't try to fill the void left by Amanda. Instead, she became a partner in his journey, someone who supported him without judgment. Their relationship was built on mutual respect and trust, qualities Ethan had come to value more than ever. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching a movie, Natalie turned to Ethan and said something that stayed with him. "You're one of the strongest people I know," she said softly. "Not because you've been through so much, but because you didn't let it make you bitter." Ethan smiled, reaching for her hand. "I had a lot of help," he replied, his voice full of gratitude. Amanda finally mustered the courage to have a real conversation with Ethan. It was a cold winter evening, and she invited him to a neutral place, a quiet cafe where they could talk without distractions. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," Amanda began, her voice trembling. "Not just for the affair, but for everything that led up to it. I wasn't fair to you, Ethan. I took you for granted, and I let my own insecurities destroy what we had." Ethan studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded. "I appreciate that, Amanda," he said. "I really do. But we can't change the past. All we can do is move forward and be the best parents we can for Lila and Jake." Amanda nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I'm trying, Ethan. I really am." "I know," Ethan said simply. It wasn't forgiveness in the traditional sense, but it was a step toward peace. 2 years after the divorce, Ethan stood in the backyard of his house, watching Lila and Jake play with Natalie's golden retriever. The evening sun bathed the yard in a warm glow, and laughter filled the air. Natalie joined him on the porch, carrying 2 glasses of iced tea. "You've built something beautiful here," she said, nodding toward the kids. Ethan smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "It wasn't easy," he admitted, "but it was worth it." As Natalie rested her head on his shoulder, Ethan realized that he had finally found a sense of peace. He had survived the betrayal, the heartbreak, and the upheaval, and now he was thriving. Amanda continued to work on herself, both personally and professionally. She rebuilt her fitness business from the ground up, focusing on helping clients who were navigating their own challenges. She also found fulfillment in volunteering at a local women's shelter, using her experiences to mentor others who were struggling with self-worth and relationships. Though she and Ethan would never be friends, they developed a respectful co-parenting relationship. They attended school events together, supported each other in decisions about the kids, and maintained open communication. Amanda knew she could never undo the past, but she was proud of the person she was becoming. Ethan's life wasn't perfect, but it was full. His relationship with Natalie grew stronger every day, and he took pride in the home they'd created together with Lila and Jake. One evening, as the family gathered around the dinner table, Jake turned to Natalie with a curious expression. "Do you think you'll marry Dad someday?" he asked bluntly. The room fell silent for a moment before everyone burst into laughter. "Jake," Lila said, nudging him playfully. Natalie smiled, her cheeks flushing. "Well, that's up to your dad," she said with a wink. Ethan chuckled, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. For the first time in years, he felt like his life was exactly where it was meant to be. Years later, Ethan stood at Lila's high school graduation, his heart swelling with pride as she walked across the stage to accept her diploma. Jake, now a teenager, sat beside him, cheering loudly for his sister. Amanda was there too, sitting a few rows away. They exchanged a brief, respectful nod, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they'd been on. As the ceremony ended, Lila ran up to Ethan, throwing her arms around him. "Thank you for everything, Dad," she said, her voice full of emotion. Ethan hugged her tightly, his heart full. "You've always been my greatest achievement," he replied. As they walked out into the bright summer sunshine, Ethan felt a profound sense of gratitude. His life had been marked by trials and pain, but it had also been filled with love, growth, and resilience. And in the end, that was what mattered most.